I really felt like God kind of intervened to lead me into kinship. I kind of grew up in a more than I don't think anyone could be more Adventist than me. I'm like fourth generation. My great grandparents were missionaries. My grandparents were missionaries. My dad was born in China, grew up in India, became a pastor. My two uncles became a pastor. My twin brother became a pastor before he was killed in a car wreck. And then I went through the whole Adventist school system from kindergarten, elementary school, high school, college, medical school, all the way through Adventist education, and then became a missionary doctor to Africa. And so, I was just in this, the most traditional Adventist, I think, upbringing you could imagine. And as part of that, I just had these assumptions about LGBTQ that I didn't even question or even think about. I was never really forced to it by any close friends or family that came out directly to me, or that I was forced to evaluate what I had just taken on without even thinking about it. And so I was just going along. And then in 2015, I came back to the U.S. on furlough, and I had just finished, doing 6 weeks in Liberia for the Ebola thing. And because of that, I got, quite a bit of opportunities to go different places and speak. Well, came back in early 2015, and I went up to do one of these ER shifts up in Northern California, and it was not busy. And one night, one of the nurses, who I don't even think she's a believer, certainly not a strong, I don't know if she's a Christian or not, but anyway, she told me, hey, you should watch this documentary called For the Bible Tells Me So. She didn't tell me what it was about, but I was just intrigued. It was like, why would this kind of agnostic nurse be telling me to watch a movie about the Bible? So I was intrigued, and so I went back to the call room and watched the movie, and it just blew me away. I found myself just crying pretty much through the entire movie, because I suddenly realized that by not thinking about it, by not questioning what I just had been fed, spoon-fed, that I was really complicit in the pain of a large number of individuals. And it just broke my heart. And I realized that I really had to everything that I just assumed was clear cut was not at all clear. And so when I finished that, I was just sitting there like stunned, like my whole world has just been flipped around. And then it was like, I remembered that, oh, some of my friends from PUC, they did a documentary about Adventists, Seventh Day Adventists. Like I just came back to my mind. And so I said, well, let me look that up. And I found it online, and I tried to find it before online. I had not been able to watch it online because, they wanted to do it in groups and whatever, but it happened to be online for free. So I watched that immediately. And again, just found myself crying through the whole thing with just the thought of how my ignorance and my living in my little world without taking the courage to question things I've been just, brainwashed into, had it really, without my knowing, it led to the pain for really a lot of pain for a lot of people. And then it was like God just kept hitting me harder. So like in the next couple of months, I went to PUC to speak, ran into Deneen Akers, said, hey, I loved your movie, Seventh-day Adventist. And she said, oh, if you like that, we need to see John Henderson's talk. He was one of my friends also from PUC, and he was currently the chaplain at PUC, and had done a whole week of prayer on sexuality, including one session on LGBTQ. And that, I watched that, and again, blew me away, got me really thinking, searching. Then I'd been invited up to somewhere around, I think it's Seattle, somewhere in Washington State, to address a group of retired Adventist workers. Well, it turns out that I stayed in the home of Carol Grady. And so I'm sitting around in what seems to me like the perfect Adventist home with, former missionaries, union workers, and eating haystacks on a Friday night. And then Carol Grady just hits me hard. It just, brings up, her story. She gives me all these books. And so that night, instead of preparing for my talk, I basically stayed up till 3 a.m. reading Carol's book about her relationship with her gay son. And again, just crying and crying and crying. And, so yeah, it was just like all this was happening once and making me really think about things. So I don't know the exact timeline, but somewhere along this line as well, I looked up Herb Montgomery's website. So he had been kind of someone who introduced me to his talks a few years before, and he'd been kind of a mentor to me, helped me to really, I think, get a healthier view of God and, what it means to be a believer. So I always, when I came back on furlough, would look up his recent talks, download them, and then when I was back in Chad, I could listen to something that would, inspire me. And so I went onto his website and found, he had spoken at this Kinship camp meeting. I was like, what's that? So I downloaded it and listened to it. And then when I realized what Kinship was, and I heard Herb tell his story about how God had also brought him into it, and he mentioned a bunch of books that he had read that had helped to change his views and make him a more affirming believer. So I, bought all those books, read all those books. And then at that point, I said, okay, I looked up the Kinship website and I said, just out of principle, I have to join Kinship. So I signed up and joined just because I felt it was the right thing to do. This is a group of people who are from my own cultural background and who share my understanding of something that most of the rest of the Adventist church does not share. So let me just join it out of principle. But I never, really contacted or had any communication or anything until somehow I must have been on the mailing list. I heard about the European Kinship meeting. And at that point, I was really wanting to reconnect with my cousin. So I did have a cousin who had come out when I was over in Africa. And so, I just hadn't really had much contact with him since he'd come out. I said, I really want to connect with him again. So I contacted my cousin Mark and I said, hey, you want to go to Vienna? So we met in Vienna at the EKM meeting. And it was there that I found, I think, wow, Kinship could be my new spiritual home. The people that I met. And I think it's because, if you've been persecuted, if you've suffered, you've been, a part of a minority that is looked down upon, and you somehow come through and still have some kind of faith or some kind of something, I think it makes you into a really deep person. And so I found that the people that I was meeting in Kinship, European meeting, and then later on in the US camp meetings, were people who were just deep, interesting. I had such great conversations that it started to really become something I was not just joining because of principle, but because, hey, I really like these people. I really enjoy being in these meetings. It's feeding me. And it was coming to the point where, my being an affirming ally was not only putting me at odds and making me feel like I had to come be in the closet with most of my Adventist friends and not share what I believed for fear of persecution myself. But there was a lot of other things that I was not really agreeing with the Adventist church. And so I felt like I was always having to be on my guard when I was in the typical Adventist settings. And so just to come to a place where I could freely be myself and know that, no, people might really argue with me and not share my beliefs and question me, but no one's going to persecute you, or they're all going to, at the end, we're all going to love each other. I'm going to be accepted fully for who I am, no matter what I believe. And that I suddenly realized this is what I've been looking for in a church my whole life. And I had never found it before. So, it's come to the point where, for me, Kinship is my church. It's hard for me to go to a traditional Adventist church anymore. I do sometimes, but I don't quite feel like I belong. And there's always, not always, but there's often things that come up that make me feel uncomfortable and say, I really want to be in here, as if I'm in support of this. But at Kinship, with the WhatsApp groups, it's like my daily spiritual nourishment. Things are said that either inspire me or that make me think. And I love that. I love to be challenged and to be made to think. And I love to be inspired. And I get that on a daily basis with the WhatsApp group. And then with the either EKM or the camp meeting, I try and join that every year if I can, because that's kind of my yearly spiritual retreat. It just renews me and energizes me in a way that I'm just drained by most of my work in Africa. It's just so difficult. But to be able to come to this, meet old friends, sit down and just have these amazing conversations with such a wide variety of people is just something that is so meaningful to me. So I just am grateful that God, just slapped me in the face, pushed me and forced me into reevaluating, something that I had taken for granted. And it was one of those kind of moments in my life that I think has been revolutionary. I've had a few like aha moments in my life, and this is one of them. And it's brought me into a community that really nurtures me and gives me what I really had been lacking in my life, which is a feeling of being a part of a real Christian community in the deepest sense of the